Right now we have lockstep. We have cultism. We want power and you guys are bad. And so we don't want you to even have a share of it. You have too much of it now. So we need to have policies to take it away from you. I used to work for Natural Resources Defense Council off and on, did a lot of work with them in DC in the international program, worked on climate change, which was called global warming back then, in the early days. And it became so obvious that the computer models back then and still are in many ways invalid. They're covering so many things up about it, and that they're not really looking at the solar cycles, the changes, the geologic, like the Iceland volcano that now blew up, like that happens periodically. They're deliberately, they've locked into this mantra of human caused climate change.
Yes.
And I'm not saying we didn't contribute a little bit to it.
And pollution is the thing.
Pollution. Absolutely.
That's what I try to focus on, pollution and the fact that needs to be changed. Less plastic everywhere, less bullshit spewing into the air. That's one thing.
And into us.
Yeah. But yeah, you made me nervous there for a second. You brought up climate change. I'm like, oh no, we had almost all this goodwill and now the audience is going to be upset. But no, you're right. That's the thing, is like it's a minority opinion for people to actually say, those models are flawed. Just like
they
COVID,
are very
the
flawed,
models.
And they have been.
It's all this. I mean, that's how we started. You brought up the AI book. It's these computer models that become the new gods that give us like, here's the trajectory. You better do something. Yeah. And no, it's just not true. But it's created to facilitate. It's the problem, reaction, solution thing all over again. It's like
it's a religion.
Yeah, the cabals or whatever, the real movers and shakers are saying, where do we want to take society? And then how do we give them the computer model to make them think that's where we're going? And then we just go right along. It's like, it is a long game.
And there have been a lot of corruption. There's been a lot of corruption over time in the way they play with the data. No question. But I started to say too, the people doing this have no understanding, as you now see with the EV car debacle that's taking place, where people just aren't buying it. They just don't understand economic dynamics. They don't understand geopolitical aspects with China, particularly buying up resources all over the world and then forcing and themselves. If climate change is fundamentally human, they're forgetting the fact that China is expanding fossil fuel use massively, and so is Russia, and so is most of Eastern Europe with brown coal kinds of things. So that's the whole thesis of what we're being fed on climate change. Remember, I started out working on this, totally thinking, my God. And then as more I got into it, it became very obvious that people are, again, running a game. Mm-hmm. And it locked in now. And the kids, they're feeding the kids in K through 12, particularly they're feeding them the steady diet of, you need the social justice warrior to fight against the capitalist system that has destroyed the wealth in the country. That's why everybody wants to come here, right?
The system that gave you a pretty decent childhood. If you're talking to people who are 15 years old, 18 years old, it's like, what was so bad for most of you? What was so bad?
It wasn't.
Yeah, that's what's so weird to me. But I just wanted to say, on the electric cars, there's also the thing we talked about, your section, that these people want to remove the white oppressors' tools like rationalism, rule of law, and private property ownership. There's that World Economic Forum thing. You will own nothing and you'll never be happier. The electric car is also like a controller's wet dream, because you can only go so far. The range is limited. Yeah. You got this talk about 15-minute cities. Oh, you're never going to need to leave the city. You got this talk about passports and like more controls about being able to travel and that kind of stuff. And it's like, the electric car helps that. I have friends who have electric cars. We all at the time lived in Southern California and grew up in Missouri. So there's the notion of going back home for the holidays My buddy has to map out how he's going to get there. And he's like got to sit at a Hardee's for 45 minutes. And I'm just like, just drive home. But, you buy into it, especially in Southern California. You buy into the whole vision, and you end up in that situation with a car that can be shut off, remotely steered. It's largely a computer. You can't take it to any auto body shop. It must go right to the Tesla factory to be repaired, and that's backed up for 6 months. So you can't. It's not what
it's crazy.
Yeah, it's a nightmare sold as a dream, let's say. But I wanted to fit this into the first hour, which is really just the ideas themselves. We often hear this movement described as Marxism, socialism, and a few times in your book, it's Maoist. Well, talk to us about why these ideas can seem appealing, why some people get swept up in them, but what they really represent under the hood. Why do these ideas sound good yet always fail? Just a quick anecdote. I remember when I was like 8 years old, I said to my dad, everybody should just share everything. And he's like, that's called socialism. And I thought I was the smartest person in the world that like, oh, well, if we just shared everything, it'd all be good. So I understand why naive young people get swept up in these ideas, but elaborate on the ideas beyond just what they're called and what they really represent. Where do they lead?
I believe in community, the idea of community, sort of an Aristotelian part. But I am an individualist, in terms of, but it isn't, I did something with the Ayn Rand Society last week, and we had this discussion, but I believe in community strengthened by the quality of the people in that community, which means I'll go Aristotelian and say, he said, our responsibility is to become the best through our minds, through our hearts, through the caring, the things that you're talking about, rational thought, which was that idea, the idea of merit, the idea of growth, the idea of becoming the best person we can become as an individual. And then if the most people who do that, then it makes the overall community much richer and better. Because you're now, working with people who are doing things to help, but also for themselves, and in doing that, helping. Now you take the ultra collectivists, and when I talk about socialism, when I talk about Marxism, we talk about Maoism, they promise fair power, sharing, participation, and the like. But they, as I said a week ago to somebody, because I used to sit in teaching in Westminster, I was near the library that Marx would go in and write Das Kapital. So you go in, and I always envisioned that. And then, I'd read it a long time ago. The reality is Marx had the French Enlightenment ideal of the human, which is that we're fundamentally good. Well, guess what? We're not. We are various things, just like you mentioned the hip hop before, and that driving people to be bad, to be stupid, to be vicious, to be greedy. And that element of us, the dark side of our nature, is there, and we have to have things within our culture that resist that dark side, because we all have it. We all have a little bad thing inside us that is, trying to get us to do that. I'm not trying to philosophize. I'm just talking from experience. Okay. And anybody wants to be honest, they have to. Well, they thought they could overcome that, the Maoist, Marxists, and the like. Well, I don't know if they actually thought that, because the reality is in each of those systems, they say they're going to create a wonderful system which everybody is equal and doing things together and sharing, but they always never give up power, the core group, never give up power, and always stay in power and always dominate and always become powerful and rich, and everybody else is below them. They're a complete contradiction in what they promise.
Can you believe it, people? A video clip and a peek into how that sweet THC sausage is made. For some people, I'm sure it's nice to put a face to the name, so I started making clips that are a little more YouTube friendly than the full show tends to be. Get the full show on any podcasting platform. I prefer to keep it audio only, so we have a more decentralized distribution for a controversial show, and also so I can edit out the ums and ahs and barking dogs and all the things that happen when a person records in their home environment. And then if you really like the show, you can sign up for THC Plus, and instead of 1 hour interviews, you get the full 2 hour interview for just $8. I think that's a better deal, more of a win-win than asking you to support the show by booking a therapy session or buying generic Viagra. It's getting weird out there, folks. So just go to the highersidechats.com or click the link at the top of any set of show notes, and all your wildest dreams will come true. All right? All right.
The Higherside Chat Show.